Good day, Mr. Arlinghouse. Today is Friday. Friday, March the 25th. Yes, 26th, sorry. 26th. Yes, I am planning ahead. Thought I'd go ahead and breach into our new unit. There are two units we're going to go over between the wars, and so we can't waste time because we are 6 weeks out from the test and 100 years away from our destination. And a lot of things happened in these last 100 years. So we need to push forward. So let's begin, shall we? Titled Political Experiments of the 1920s. In other words, the new governments that were formed as a result of and after World War I. Political experimental regimes dotted across Eastern and Western Europe. In Russia, the Bolsheviks, communists, saw communism as the way of the future. In some countries, liberal democracies had given the right to vote to many women and also to formally voteless males. Democratically elected parliaments reined in the former dictatorships and monarchies that were pre-World War I Europe. Wilson's 14-point idea of democracy and self-determination, however, ran into harsh reality. Yes. So, overall, liberal, idealistic, parliamentary, democratic policies faded in the face of reality. You see, the problem with democracy is that basically democracy is a big committee. Democracy cannot make quick decisions. On the other hand, totalitarian governments literally turn around and make a decision on a dime. Democracies have to put up with public opinion. Totalitarian regimes do not. So, in Paris, the Treaty of Versailles, of course, stirred controversy. Germany had been humiliated, and there was haggling over the war reparation payments, but also there was haggling over the Germans' ability to pay those payments. Many Eastern European countries demanded redrawing of their borders to address self-determination and nationalism issues. The French also constantly thought that the treaty was not being enforced. There was a desire to return to pre-war prosperity, but because the massive amounts of resources that had been poured into the war effort, that was not happening too soon. Just a moment, Mr. Arlinghouse, forgive me. And we're back, Mr. Arlinghouse. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, with the amount of money and resources and human beings' lives that have been poured into the war effort, prosperity wasn't returning. Remember, for example, there were some towns in not just mainland Europe, not just Germany, but also Britain and France that lost entirely their male populations. You can't just recover from that. As it says there, what had been normal before the war could not be reestablished. Britain had lost 750,000 soldiers. France had lost 1,385,000. Germany 1,800,000, and Russia 1,700,000. And many more than this were wounded, not only physically, but also, you just don't walk away from a war like World War I and go back to your life and just pick up where you left off. There is a thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, which was real then. It wasn't recognized, it wasn't diagnosed, but it was as real then as it is now. This represented not only a loss of life, but also a loss of producers and consumers. So it disrupted what had been normal. European nations were deeply in debt to each other, but the big creditor was the United States. Yeah, the United States had made bank on World War I because remember, for most of the war, they weren't involved, and all they were doing was selling stuff. Russia had repudiated the debt of the Tsar's family. Actually, yeah, the Communist Party in Russia. Bolsheviks. The United States did not ask war reparations of Germany, but did ask debt payment of their allies. Now get your head around this, Mr. Arlinghouse. It becomes a major point of consternation between the United States and Britain and France. The U.S. didn't ask money from Germany, but they wanted the money that France and Britain owed them. No nation was in control of its own economic life, even the United States, because they were still dependent upon France and Britain paying their debts. France and Britain, of course, had hinged that to Germany's ability to pay their debts. So, more nations became wrapped up in their own nationalistic goals, and this is a recipe for return to war. I mean, literally, the unity of World War I had disappeared literally at the end. The new small states were most often not economically viable. We talked about that before. As it says there, the new boundaries, particularly in Eastern Europe, hampered trade by disconnecting raw materials from factories and cut across road and railroad lines. They created stops where there hadn't been stops before. Resources were separated from people who wanted to buy them, and the various and sundry things needed to produce a product now had to cross national lines, meant they had to pay a tariff. So, the European dominance over the world economy was greatly weakened. The United States became less dependent upon European goods and now was a major competitor to European goods. Europeans had sold off many of their investments during the war. The United States and Japan began to penetrate the Latin American markets that had been dominated by the British. The war also had given organized labor new provenance, new dominance, we should say. The middle class became suspicious of the labor movements and became more and more conservative. Ah, yes, socialism in the Soviet Union took control of a large part of Asia and retained control until 1991. The Communist Party in Russia was neither a massive movement nor a nationalistic one. In other words, once again, the Communist Party, throughout the era of the Soviet Union, 1922 to 1991, Communist Party represented only a tiny minority of the people of the Soviet Union. Less than 1% of the Russian population belonged. After 1917, also, there was a widespread opposition to the Communist Party in Russia. The communists felt that their party was the epoch-making event of world history, and they felt that communism should be exported violently if necessary. The Bolsheviks were firmly planted as no force could stabilize them, because we talked about that. After World War I, that little experiment in international cooperation to try and kick the Bolsheviks out of Russia failed, as it says there. because the white Russians were not organized enough and foreign help not substantial enough. Under this thing called war communism, the new economic policy that Lenin started, the new Russian government, the new Soviet government, confiscated banks, transportation systems, and heavy industry. In other words, all these things were nationalized. The state also seized grain to feed the armies and the workers in the cities. Lenin could use the pretext of the Civil War to continue these atrocities, these abuses on the populace. Between 1920 and 1921, there were large strikes due to the resistance of the Bolshevists. Resistance to the Bolshevists. To the Bolshevists, Mr. Arlinghouse. Yeah, I mean, the Bolsheviks, not popular. The Alliance of the Workers and the Peasants used the slogan "Peace, Bread, and Land." In March of 1921, the Soviet Baltic Fleet mutinied. The Red Army crushed these activities, though with great loss of life. For the time being, it appeared that the Soviet Union would be an island of revolutionary communism in a sea of capitalism. And so that's when Lenin comes forward with the new compromising economic policy. Now, Mr. Arlinghouse, I want you to make sure that you look at that Paul Sargent video that I put on this particular unit. Paul Sargent does a good job of talking about Lenin's NEP, the new economic policy. And you say, in a nutshell, what it was, Lenin saw that this new fledgling communist government in Russia had all kind of problems. And so Lenin actually goes back in time, and he adds some capitalistic incentives to production so that people could stabilize prices, could make money. There was a reason. I mean, before the new NEP, Russian farmers, in order to push prices up, were actually torching their own crops and slaughtering their own animals. But Lenin comes back and he says, all right, we're going to do this. And this new economic policy, they allow private economic enterprise. Apart from banking, transportation, and international commerce, there would be toleration of private economic enterprise, capitalism. Peasants could farm for profit. They would pay taxes, but also profit from extra grain sales. Lenin felt the Russian peasants could hold the key to finally winning the Russian Revolution. The NEP was partially successful, but there were virtually no consumer goods for the peasants to purchase with their money from the grain. And see, that's one of the problems that comes up. That will become a lifelong problem in the Soviet Union. Okay. 1927, industrial production had risen back to its 1913 level. It appeared that Russia had become a large country of small shops and businesses. However, with Lenin's death imminent in the Soviet Union, the battle became between Joseph Stalin Napoleon, and the former Red Army chief Leon Trotsky, who was Snowball in you know what I'm talking about, Mr. Arnhouse, Animal Farm, Napoleon, Snowball. Many Bolshevists believed that Lenin's liberal compromises had betrayed Marxism. Lenin had a stroke in 1922 and died in 1924. Lenin didn't like either Trotsky or Stalin, but especially hated Stalin. But however, Stalin's party power base was within the Communist Party structure. The issue was over Russia's path towards industrialization. Trotsky, the more liberal left wing of the two, urged rapid industrialization through the export of farm products. He felt agriculture should be collectivized, meaning that farmers should combine their resources peasants should be made to pay for that collectivization, and new revolutions must occur outside of Russia to export revolution. Party members should be able to criticize the government. Stalin, the more right wing, was aided by Nikolai Bukharin, from the editor of Pravda. Now that I'm going to throw that one on the test, Mr. Arlinghouse. Pravda is the official newspaper of the Communist Party. It's still printed somewhere today. It used to back when I first came up here to Northern Kentucky 40 years ago. There was a big newspaper stand. There may still be one over there in Cincinnati in the big bus terminal, the tank bus terminal, and you could find copies of Pravda. Pravda, the official publication of the Communist Party. I don't think either the newsstand or the paper is there anymore. They pressed for the continuation of the new economic policy, relatively slow industrialization, and a decentralized economic policy and some private enterprise. However, the bottom line is this: Stalin was much more brutal. If you didn't do what Stalin said, you got sent to Gulag. G-U-L-A-G. G-U-L-A-G. Gulag, meaning basically a concentration camp in Siberia where, you weren't coming back. During Stalin's reign, for example, people could be sent to Gulag for something as trivial as owning a radio. Yeah. Stalin amassed power through his command of bureaucratic and administrative methods, and he had the support of the Communist Party. Because Stalin had the support of the Communist Party because he controlled entry into the party. Trotsky was removed from all offices, expelled from the Communist Party, first exiled to Siberia, and finally exiled from Russia. I keep saying Russia. It should be the USSR. And he was found in Mexico with an ice pick through the back of his head. Mr. Arlinghouse, something I found out today. I'm always learning stuff. But I didn't know this. Yeah, so Trotsky goes away. And he goes and lives in Mexico, where he becomes romantically involved with one Frida Kahlo. Now, if you don't know who Frida Kahlo is, she is a very well-renowned artist of the 20th century. Recognizable because she has the unibrow thing going on, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's kind of his girlfriend. At any rate, like I said, they find Trotsky in 1940 with an ice pick through his ear. If you judge what has been happening recently with Russia, hadn't changed much. All right. In 1919, the Soviet communists founded the Third International European Socialist Movement, also called the Comintern. The Comintern wanted to make Leninist Marxism the model for all socialist parties outside the Soviet Union. In 1920, the Comintern imposed 21, it was called the 21 Conditions, under which any other socialist organization would have to ascribe to be a part of Comintern, meaning basically the International Communist Party. These included acknowledging Moscow, meaning Russia's leadership, rejecting any kind of reformist or revisionist socialism, repudiating previous socialist leaders, and adopting the Communist Party name. The Comintern sought to destroy all democratic socialism. So, if you don't know what democratic socialism is a more milder form of socialism, like they have in Great Britain, for example. And some would say like they have in the United States, for example. A type of socialism where the government does regulate some things, and yet there's lots of choice. The decision as to join, whether or not join, split every major socialist party in Europe. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the communists and the social democrats fought each other more savagely than they fought capitalism or conservatism. Yes. Stalin wanted to be the leader of communism in the world. And like it says there, the communists and the social democrats once again being socialist movements in the more liberal Western countries. Soviet political rhetoric aroused fears through every major European government and political party and was an easy target of the politicians. Remember, I said this before, Mr. Allinghouse, that for the next 20 years, it'll be communism that everybody worries about. Tell you what, we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with Benito Mussolini and fascism tomorrow. So, where are we at?